It started with a post, one that would ignite a firestorm across social media and thrust Christian Combs into the center of a scandal that refused to fade away. As headlines continued to swirl around his father, Sean Diddy Combs, following the music mogul's release from custody without formal charges, Christian didn't offer sympathy or restraint. Instead, he went on the offensive. In a series of bold, unfiltered statements, he mocked the very victims who had come forward with decades-old allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse, suggesting they were about to face legal consequences for speaking out. His words weren't just provocative, they were seen by many as an open declaration that the Combs family believed they were untouchable, immune from accountability no matter how damning the accusations. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within hours, Christian's comments had gone viral, shared and dissected across platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter, where outrage quickly built momentum. Survivors, advocates, celebrities, and everyday users alike condemned his tone-deaf response, calling it a textbook example of victim blaming wrapped in bravado. Legal analysts speculated whether his public taunts could backfire, possibly strengthening the hands of those accusing Diddy by painting the family as defensive, dismissive, and perhaps even guilty of trying to intimidate survivors into silence. Meanwhile, supporters of Diddy rushed to defend him, arguing that the allegations were part of a coordinated effort to tarnish his legacy and extract money from one of hip-hop's most successful figures. But beyond the noise of online debate, the real story simmered beneath the surface. Multiple women had come forward with disturbing accounts of alleged abuse, stretching back years, some dating to the height of Diddy's influence in the 1990s and early 2000s. These weren't idle rumors, they were serious claims involving coercion, assault, and psychological manipulation, all allegedly orchestrated by a man whose name once commanded respect and admiration across the entertainment world. And while prosecutors had not yet filed criminal charges, the absence of legal action did little to quiet the growing chorus of voices demanding justice. If anything, it fueled speculation that Diddy was using his vast resources to buy time, stall investigations, and shield himself behind a wall of lawyers and public relations experts. Christian's decision to speak so openly and so aggressively only intensified scrutiny on the entire situation. His statements weren't just personal musings, they were public declarations made by someone closely tied to the accused, someone who clearly saw himself as a protector of the Combs family name. That positioning, however, came at a cost. By appearing to mock the victims and hint at legal retaliation, Christian may have inadvertently opened the door for defamation lawsuits that could bypass the limitations of criminal prosecution altogether. Civil courts don't require proof beyond a reasonable doubt, only a preponderance of evidence, meaning that if the accusers could show their reputations had been harmed by the Combs family's public attacks, they might stand a strong chance of securing financial compensation and public vindication. Behind the scenes, attorneys representing several potential plaintiffs were already laying the groundwork for what could become a wave of civil litigation against Diddy. Sources close to the matter indicated that some of the alleged victims were preparing to file lawsuits citing emotional distress, defamation, and intentional infliction of harm, not just against Diddy, but also against those who had publicly disparaged them. Christian's incendiary remarks gave these legal teams exactly what they needed: a paper trail of hostility, a documented pattern of intimidation, and a clear indication that the Combs family had no intention of engaging with the allegations in good faith. At the same time, the broader implications of the case began to ripple through Hollywood and the music industry. For years, Diddy had remained a towering figure, celebrated for his business acumen, his contributions to hip-hop, and his ability to reinvent himself across decades. But now, sponsors were quietly pulling back, collaborators were distancing themselves, and longtime partners were reevaluating their relationships with the embattled mogul. The shift wasn't just about the allegations themselves, it was about the way the Combs family had chosen to respond to them, by mocking victims rather than showing empathy, by threatening legal action instead of seeking resolution. Christian had helped turn what might have been a contained scandal into a full-blown cultural reckoning. And yet within certain circles, the narrative remained different. Among Diddy's loyal fanbase and inner circle, there was a belief that the allegations were exaggerated, politically motivated, or financially driven. Some argued that the timing of the accusations, decades after the alleged incidents, was suspicious, pointing to the expiration of statutes of limitations and the lack of physical evidence as reasons to doubt the claims. Others emphasized the importance of due process, insisting that Diddy deserved the presumption of innocence until proven guilty in a court of law. To them, Christian's defense of his father was not only justified but necessary, a reminder that wealth and fame should not equate to guilt, and that every person deserves the right to fight back against false accusations. Still, the damage was done. Whether or not criminal charges ever materialized, the perception of Diddy had shifted. The image of the fearless entrepreneur, the charismatic performer, the self-made titan of industry had been replaced by something darker, more complicated. The allegations alone had cast a long shadow over his career, and Christian's inflammatory remarks had only deepened the divide between those who stood by him and those who demanded accountability. For survivors of abuse, the case became a painful reminder of how difficult it is to be heard when facing off against powerful institutions and individuals who can afford the best legal defenses money can buy. As the legal battle continued to unfold, the focus remained on the next steps. Would prosecutors eventually bring criminal charges? Would the victims follow through on their threats of civil litigation? How would the entertainment industry respond to the ongoing controversy? And perhaps most importantly, what would become of the Combs family's legacy in the wake of this storm? One thing was certain, the saga was far from over. With each new development, the stakes grew higher. The courtroom would soon become the battlefield, but the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. For better or worse, Christian Combs had ensured that the world would be watching closely as the truth, or at least the version of it that could be proven, slowly came to light. To understand the gravity of the current scandal engulfing Sean Diddy Combs, one must first appreciate the scale of his influence and success. Over the course of 3 decades, Diddy has built a multifaceted empire spanning music, fashion, television, and finance. From founding Bad Boy Records in the mid-1990s to launching his own clothing line, Sean John, and later venturing into spirits with Ciroc Vodka, Diddy has consistently demonstrated a rare ability to identify trends and monetize them. His charisma, hustle mentality, and relentless work ethic have earned him both admiration and envy, cementing his status as one of the wealthiest and most recognizable Black entrepreneurs in America. Yet, for all his achievements, Diddy has never been entirely free of controversy. From high-profile altercations and lawsuits to whispers of questionable behavior behind closed doors, there have always been murmurs surrounding his private life. However, these stories rarely gain traction, often dismissed as gossip or overshadowed by his larger-than-life persona. That changed dramatically in recent months, when a wave of allegations surfaced, painting a starkly different picture of the man known for his flashy lifestyle and philanthropy. What began as isolated reports soon snowballed into a coordinated movement, with multiple women coming forward to share eerily similar narratives of manipulation, coercion, and abuse. Their accounts spanned decades, implicating not just Diddy, but also a network of associates, enablers, and industry insiders who allegedly facilitated the environment in which such behavior thrived. While the specifics varied, common themes emerged: underage encounters, drug-fueled parties, blackmail, and non-consensual acts, all allegedly orchestrated under the guise of mentorship, opportunity, and access. For many, the sheer number of accusers and the consistency of their testimonies lent credibility to the claims. Unlike past allegations, which often lacked corroboration or witnesses, these new disclosures were bolstered by internal documents, security footage, and testimonies from former employees and insiders. Some of the accusers were well-known figures in the entertainment world, while others were lesser-known individuals willing to risk exposure for the sake of accountability. Their courage galvanized a wider conversation about power dynamics in the music industry and the systemic silencing of victims who dared to speak out against influential men. Despite the mounting pressure, Diddy maintained his denial. Through his legal team, he issued carefully worded statements emphasizing his commitment to due process and rejecting what he described as false and defamatory accusations. At the same time, his representatives worked behind the scenes to manage the fallout, reaching out to media outlets, influencers, and business partners to prevent further reputational damage. But unlike previous scandals where strategic PR moves had allowed him to regain control of the narrative, this time the tide seemed to be turning irreversibly. Christian Combs' role in the unfolding drama cannot be understated. As the eldest son of Diddy, Christian has long been positioned as both heir apparent and public defender of the family brand. He has appeared alongside his father in commercials, interviews, and events, cultivating a reputation as a savvy businessman and loyal son. Yet his response to the allegations revealed a side of him that few had seen before, a combative, confrontational figure willing to go on the attack rather than engage in diplomacy or reconciliation. And in the days following Diddy's release from police custody, Christian took to Instagram Live and Twitter to address the allegations head-on. His tone was defiant, almost dismissive,
as he questioned the motives of the accusers and suggested that they were seeking attention or financial gain. At one point, he stated, "Y'all know y'all gonna get sued, right?" A remark that was interpreted by many as a direct threat to the victims. When pressed by commenters and journalists, Christian doubled down, insisting that his father was being unfairly targeted and that the allegations were part of a larger conspiracy to bring him down. These statements, widely circulated online, drew sharp criticism from survivors' advocacy groups, legal analysts, and members of the public who viewed them as callous and insensitive. Social media users highlighted the irony of Christian defending his father while simultaneously issuing veiled threats against those who had endured trauma. Critics noted that by mocking the victims and framing the allegations as baseless, Christian was reinforcing harmful stereotypes about survivors of sexual violence, namely that they are opportunistic liars rather than credible witnesses.
Legal experts also weighed in, warning that Christian's public comments could have significant repercussions. Statements made on social media can be used as evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings, particularly when they suggest intent, knowledge, or a pattern of behavior. By publicly asserting that the accusers would face legal consequences, Christian may have inadvertently provided ammunition for those seeking to prove that the Combs family engaged in a campaign of intimidation and suppression. Moreover, such rhetoric could be interpreted as an admission that the family believes the allegations hold enough weight to warrant retaliation. Meanwhile, Diddy's legal team scrambled to contain the fallout. Behind closed doors, negotiations were reportedly underway to explore settlement options with some of the accusers, though details remain murky. Sources familiar with the discussions indicated that Diddy's attorneys were weighing the risks of going to trial versus attempting to reach confidential agreements that would keep the allegations out of the public eye. However, Christian's aggressive stance complicated these efforts, as it signaled a refusal to acknowledge wrongdoing or extend any form of apology or restitution. The situation was further exacerbated by the involvement of high-profile attorneys representing some of the alleged victims. Several prominent civil rights lawyers and specialists in sexual assault cases had already begun drafting lawsuits against Diddy, citing defamation, emotional distress, and other civil torts. These legal actions, if pursued, could result in multi-million-dollar judgments against Diddy and potentially expose sensitive details about his personal conduct that had previously been kept under wraps. As the legal and public relations battle intensified, the broader implications for Diddy's career and legacy became increasingly clear. Once a ubiquitous presence in pop culture, Diddy found himself increasingly absent from major projects and endorsements. Networks that had once featured him prominently began removing references to him from promotional materials, while longtime collaborators distanced themselves from his name. Even his reality TV show Casa de Leche faced uncertainty amid the scandal, with production delays and contract renegotiations adding to the sense that his influence was waning. For Christian, the backlash served as a harsh lesson in public image management. Long accustomed to leveraging his father's fame and connections, he suddenly found himself at the center of a controversy that threatened to define his own identity in ways he hadn't anticipated. His attempts to rally support for Diddy were met with skepticism, as many questioned whether he truly understood the gravity of the allegations or simply felt obligated to defend his father at all costs. Ultimately, the Combs family's handling of the crisis underscored a fundamental tension between loyalty and accountability. On one hand, Christian's instinct to protect his father was understandable from a familial perspective. On the other, his choice of tactics, mockery, dismissal, and legal threats alienated potential allies and reinforced perceptions that the family was more concerned with preserving its reputation than addressing the underlying issues. In doing so, Christian may have unwittingly accelerated the unraveling of the carefully constructed image that Diddy had spent decades building. As the legal battle continued to unfold, the focus remained on the next steps. Would prosecutors eventually bring criminal charges? Would the victims follow through on their threats of civil litigation? How would the entertainment industry respond to the ongoing controversy? And perhaps most importantly, what would become of the Combs family's legacy in the wake of this storm? One thing was certain: the saga was far from over. With each new development, the stakes grew higher. The courtroom would soon become the battlefield, but the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. For better or worse, Christian Combs had ensured that the world would be watching closely as the truth, or at least the version of it that could be proven, slowly came to light.
Christian Combs' decision to publicly defend his father was not just a personal stance, it was a reflection of a broader cultural phenomenon in which wealth, celebrity, and privilege often dictate how allegations of misconduct are received and addressed. Historically, high-profile figures accused of wrongdoing have relied on a combination of legal maneuvering, media spin, and family loyalty to weather storms of controversy. In this context, Christian's response followed a familiar playbook: deny, deflect, counterattack. But in the current climate, where movements like Me Too have heightened awareness around sexual misconduct and empowered survivors to speak out, such tactics no longer guarantee success. In fact, they often backfire. The Combs family's approach mirrored that of other celebrities accused of similar offenses. Think of Bill Cosby's initial denials, Harvey Weinstein's aggressive legal battles, or R. Kelly's insistence on innocence, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. In each case, defenders rallied around the accused, dismissing accusers as opportunists or fabricators. This strategy, while effective in the short term, ultimately proved unsustainable as more victims came forward and public sentiment shifted decisively against the accused. What makes the Diddy case particularly complex is the intersection of race, class, and gender in discussions of accountability. Some commentators have pointed out that black men, especially those in positions of power, often face unique challenges when navigating allegations of sexual misconduct. Historical patterns of racial injustice and stereotyping mean that accusations against black men are sometimes treated with greater suspicion or severity compared to those against white counterparts. At the same time, the rise of intersectional feminism has pushed for a more inclusive understanding of survivorship, recognizing that people of color, LGBTQ+ individuals, and marginalized communities experience harassment and abuse in distinct ways that deserve equal attention. Within this framework, Christian Combs' defense of his father must be examined not only for its legal implications, but also for its socio-political resonance. His comments, while intended to protect his family's reputation, played directly into long-standing debates about how society handles accusations against powerful men, particularly black men, in the public eye. Some critics argued that by dismissing the victims outright, Christian was reinforcing harmful stereotypes that portray black men as inherently predatory or dangerous. Others countered that his stance was less about race and more about the natural instinct of family protection, regardless of intent. The impact was undeniable. Christian's words amplified the perception that the Combs family was unwilling to engage meaningfully with the allegations. Rather than acknowledging the pain of the victims or expressing a willingness to cooperate with investigations, Christian chose to mock them and suggest legal retaliation. This approach not only alienated potential allies, but also undermined any argument that the Combses were merely victims of a smear campaign. Moreover, Christian's comments created a rift between Diddy's supporters and the broader public. Many fans and industry peers who had previously stood by Diddy expressed discomfort with the way his son was handling the situation. Some took to social media to voice concerns that the family's combative stance was making it harder to believe in Diddy's innocence. Others urged Christian to step back and allow legal professionals to handle the matter without further inflaming tensions. This dynamic highlights another crucial aspect of the case: generational differences in how public figures navigate scandal. Younger audiences, particularly Gen Z and millennials, tend to place a higher value on transparency, accountability, and social justice than in previous generations. They are less likely to tolerate evasive or hostile responses to allegations of misconduct, especially when those allegations involve vulnerable populations. Christian, who straddles both worlds as a millennial celebrity with ties to older entertainment industry traditions, found himself caught between these competing expectations. His response also raised questions about the role of social media in shaping legal outcomes. In an era where viral posts can influence public perception and even sway judicial proceedings, the Combs family's use of digital platforms to push back against the allegations carried significant risks. Legal scholars have long debated the ethical boundaries of using social media during active investigations, noting that statements made online can be used against defendants in court. In this case, Christian's remarks could be interpreted as evidence of consciousness of guilt, an inference that could be leveraged by prosecutors or civil attorneys seeking to build a case against Diddy. Perhaps most concerning for the Combs family was the possibility that Christian's actions had inadvertently strengthened the resolve of the accusers. Rather than deterring them, his public mockery seemed to embolden the victims and their advocates, reinforcing their belief that they were fighting against a system designed to protect the powerful. This sentiment resonated deeply with younger activists and survivors' organizations, who framed the case as yet another example of how elite figures use wealth and influence to evade responsibility. As the legal battle continued to unfold, the focus remained on the next steps. Would prosecutors eventually bring criminal charges? Would the victims follow through on their threats of civil litigation? How would the entertainment industry respond to the ongoing controversy? and perhaps most importantly, what would become of the Combs family's legacy in the wake of this storm. One thing was certain, the saga was far from over. With each new development, the stakes grew higher. The courtroom would soon become the battlefield, but the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. For better or worse, Christian Combs had ensured that the world would be watching closely as the truth, or at least the version of it that could be proven, slowly came to light.